At the societal level, Ellul uses an argument from information theory to show that societies that are closed off from new information will drive from increasing entropy. In order to prevent this from happening, there must be tensions between groups in society, along with the recognition among members of these groups that there is still a common measure between them and their opponents. So, in Ellul's early work, the prime work here is the theological foundation of law. This is an atypical work. He has almost a doctrine of orders of creation, that there were certain institutions created by God, and though they will change in form, abolishing them will bring about disorder. Whereas in the later work, the family still somewhat performs that structure, but the state and money are not performing that. And in fact, he doesn't mention money as a God-created institution in the theological foundation of law. He does mention property. So just briefly, he remains positive about the family because he thinks it serves to keep people in long-term relationships of dialogue. He thinks it's significant to have a pledged word in marriage as opposed to unpledged cohabitation. He thinks that marriage protects the weak. He cites sociological studies showing that children of intact families are better off than children of partnerships that do not stay together. And so he thinks that there are various reasons why the family keeps the kind of dialogue open that can lead to transmission of truth. Whereas property, he was positive about in the theological foundation of law. It almost totally drops out as an institution in his later work. He criticizes Christians who think that changing your regime of property from, say, a private property regime to a state or collective property regime will solve the problems of poverty and oppression, because he thinks that doesn't solve the spiritual problem of money. It doesn't solve individual responsibility. So money becomes the prime actor, and it's a power in competition with God. It shows an alternative spiritual future. But this is a power and principality which, according to Ellul's eschatology, will be destroyed. And sociologically, he sees it as setting up a relation of abstraction, buyer and seller, rather than relationships in which truth can be communicated. And the state, there is a whole sequence you can draw between the theological foundation of law and anarchy and Christianity of contrasts between what different biblical passages signify in the two books. In the theological foundation of law, he says that Christ submitting to his trial validated all human law. But in anarchy and Christianity, when Jesus says to Pilate, you could not have any power if it did not come to you from above. From above is Satan in that one, because it's the power of Satan to offer Jesus all kingdoms and temptation. In the theological foundation of law, the important thing about Solomon is his wisdom and his desire to pursue justice. In anarchy and Christianity, the important thing about Solomon is that power eventually corrupted him. And sociologically, this is borne out by the fact that in his positive proposals in Changer de Révolution, there's no place for the abstract centralized state. In fact, that's the first step that he thinks must be taken. Even though there are a bunch of functions that you wonder in that book, well, who's going to pay the guaranteed minimum income and things like that? He says you have to abolish the centralized state. So this is an abstract state. In the history of institutions, he goes into the abstract state, which he believes is different from a city-state or from some kind of empire where the king is viewed as divine. It arose first in the late Roman Republic, where there was too much expansion of territory for this res publica to be something that any individual was responsible for. So an abstract citizenry was responsible for an abstract collection of goods. And he doesn't see this form of state as uniform. He thinks it dropped out during the Middle Ages, but he sees modern nation states, and especially modern technicized nation states, as exacerbating this abstraction of the state, and he sees a takeover of the nation by the state as having happened in France in the last several centuries. So in parallel with his abandonment of his early doctrine of orders of creation, there's a further study that he made of the state over the centuries, and he sees that it's turning into a machine for abstractions. It's not, he does think there are legitimate roles for political authority, but he doesn't think that the current technocized state is able to carry them out. And I'm going to run out of time if I don't quickly summarize these things. So that's why he was very negative about the state and money and positive about family. But anti-institutionalist rhetoric dominates because when he says institution, most of the time he means institutions based on abstractions. Then in his 1967 book, Metamorphose du Bourgeois, he talked about both the old bourgeois dominated by the image of people in charge of a business enterprise who were interested primarily in private property and suspicious of the state, being replaced over the generations by a class whose ancestors had been pretty much proletarians, but who had become accustomed to a middle-class lifestyle. And because the state's intervention was facilitating this lifestyle, became comfortable with it. So this is parallel to his analysis of money and power, whereby capitalism and socialism are two sides of the same coin. He sees the old bourgeois exalting private property and the new bourgeois exalting the intervention of the state as both based on a common ideology. And this is a doctrine of happiness, whereas happiness has a lot to do with material comfort, freedom from onerous responsibilities, but it is achieved by a machine of material well-being, and that machine requires responsibility and work. So there's a contradiction at the heart of it, and he sees it ultimately as a kind of nihilism. So he doesn't see that continuing this bourgeois lifestyle is going to eventually lead to any kind of satisfaction. The doctrine of progress is not tied to a specific object anymore. I mean, given his criticism of technique in all his other books, it's likely to lead to more chaos, more danger. So that book puts in question the middle-class lifestyle. Okay, here we are, United States, 2012. We have some very interesting political movements that have arisen somewhat on the fringes of our partisan system. And I think that Ellul would find them both having to do, not having a deep enough critique of power. And that doesn't mean that individuals within these movements wouldn't have deeper critiques. But I'm thinking of some of the issues that arise. The Tea Party says they believe in limited government. Well, there's a paradox of style. They're primarily acting through trying to persuade elected officials who believe in limited government to be elected. We had a sort of self-contradictory grandstanding instance last summer where some of the people backed by the Tea Party were willing to risk the possibility that the United States would not make good on its debt and perhaps have to pay a higher interest rate because they think, what can you do to limit government? Well, not let it spend any more money. So this seems kind of self-contradictory. Another area that some of the Tea Party people are interested in, they want to push American welfare reform even further so that people take more responsibility. And a phrase that's on Senator Jim DeMint's South Carolina website, and he's a Tea Party-backed senator, said, "We don't need more Americans who are dependent on Washington for a handout. We need more Americans who can stand on their own with a job and a vibrant economy." So you have this duty to be self-sufficient, and it's cast as a character issue, but it's also cast as you need to join the middle class. And then, so that this criticism of entitlements can be posed as a character issue, but it's also posed as a conformity issue. I mean, if you're looking and thinking, well, should I conform to that? And then on Occupy's side, I certainly wouldn't want to say that everybody in Occupy falls under the same categories, interested in the same issues, because it's a diverse group, and in fact was criticized at first because it didn't have specific demands. End corporate personhood is a slogan that's arisen out of that movement. Does it apply to all types, functions, and sizes of corporations? What about labor unions? What about nonprofits? What about, there's been a decision by the U.S. Supreme Court recently, Citizens United, that has aroused a lot of opposition because corporations can pump money into campaigns. Well, what about continuity contracts? If all the members of the board of directors are killed in the same accident, does that mean that the corporation couldn't make good on a contract, for instance? And then I saw a handmade sign in an Occupy Chicago protest and said, money doesn't work, people do, which for those sympathetic in what to personalism, that has a lot of resonance. However, there's a certain paradox and symbolism. When you're occupying the sacred spaces of the financial sector, that's part of that, you're wanting something done. You're wanting a redistribution. I mean, not everybody involved in the movement would say that they necessarily wanted just a strict redistribution, but there's some sort of idea that the financial sector could do something. And I think that's borne out when you read on the website, We Are the 99%, about I worked hard, I did the right thing, but I can't make ends meet anymore. And so there's still this American dream of working hard and accomplishing things and having material prosperity. So if you think, as I do, that we have to question that dream, then you're thinking, how do I navigate this? How do I say that, well, there are some serious issues raised, even by the people whom I do not want in power. There can be serious issues raised about the extent of government, about character formation, about where we draw the line between what corporations should be able to do and what human beings should, and about the role of financial wealth. But it in some ways doesn't go far enough. And yet, I'm also, as a constructive theologian, this is the top table on my paper, I also have some questions about Ellul's distinction between love and power. So I can think of situations in which a middle turn is needed. Maybe abstractions could complement individual relationships. I mean, what if the people in your immediate area would not be sympathetic if you wanted to borrow money for a particular purpose, and if you went to the bank or the government, you would find a different perspective. Might not be a healthy one either, but you would have a different perspective. And is material well-being ever an ethically significant category? I don't think Ellul would deny that it could be, but I think he would say that we've made an idol out of it. So all those things, there are a lot more questions raised in the handout than I had time to talk about, but my time is up. Thank you.